evasive maneuvers. I'm putting us into a spin.
And here we have it, the Rocinante from the Expanse. This piece of legitimate salvage was purchased off a GAM body and printed on my Anycubic Mono 2 before assembly and painting. But it wouldn't be much of a video if we started with the final result, so first, let's go back to the build. First we will start with building out our sub-assemblies, starting with the nose piece. The antenna dongle things on the nose will be dry fitted into place before being glued into place using super glue from a bottle that admittedly I probably should have retired a while. With this completed, I then glued in the top airlock for the Rocinante while leaving the cover off. I had intended to have this be a piece that could be taken off, but during a later step I dropped the Rossi, breaking the edge of the airlock, causing me to glue the cover in place as if it was always meant to be that way. So for sake of argument, it was. The turret housings will be left off the model for painting and will be their own sub-assemblies. The housing and the cowls were glued together using that oh-so-tired bottle. Turrets themselves will be glued onto their support struts. However, they will not be glued down to the retractable arms. Instead, these will be held together via friction to enable some movement when the piece is completed. With all that done, it's on to the second sub-assembly. With all the parts for the next sub-assembly laid out, I spent some time dry fitting the middle body section together with the rest of the build to ensure the best possible fit and to minimize the amount of gap filling I'll need to do later. As you can see, it wasn't that successful. With everything dry fit, I glued the two middle sections together and then dry fitted the completed middle section into the back section of the ship, before applying glue to the top and attaching the top sections of the middle to the ship itself. With that done, I then glued on the final panels to the tops of the recently added top middle section bits of the ship. These things here. Now, midship is done, so it's now on to the final sub-assemblies. The next sub-assembly is the rear section of the ship, right before the engine. First, I glued in the engine's radiator, heat shield, rear section grille to its housing. The landing gear support struts were glued into place on every other slot, while the gas logo was glued into those empties left behind. This was repeated all around the model. Next, it was time for the engine, which simply required me to glue in 6 flaps around the entire thing. Landing gear was next. As the landing gear was going to be stowed, all that was needed to be done was a quick glue of all 4 legs to the ring that would then attach to the support struts we attached to the rear section earlier. And after all that, we are left with a very holy ship in need of some finishing touches. To fill in the gaps, we first need to mix up some milli putty using the tried and true roll it with your fingers a bunch method before rolling small balls of it into long worm-like sausages. Using a sculpting tool, I simply pushed the milli put into the gaps and removed as much excess as I could. After waiting 4 hours for it all to dry, I could go in with my sanding tools and make all the gaps flush. I then had to work on the internal wiring and LEDs that would go inside the Rossi. This was simply me soldering some LEDs together with some wires, gluing the LEDs into place in the various sections of the ship, before attaching them to a power source and switch, most of which will occur off screen, as keeping this in focus and doing it all safely was not really possible with my current setup. The first part of the painting process would happen off screen, as I applied a base coat of Abaddon Black using my airbrush before giving it a light gray dry brush for easy edge highlighting. After that, some Mechanicus Standard Grey was used to pick out all the dark grey bits across the rear section of the subassembly, including the engine panels as well as the inner rim of the rear section. Using Abaddon Black again, I would clean up any overspill that may have occurred while painting the grey. Other dark grey details were also picked out, such as the hatch details and various panels across the surface of the model. As I'm using thin down paints, multiple coats will be required to get a nice full grey finish on some of these surfaces. But that's not a problem, I'll just come back over them later. Finally, I'd add some dark grey to the housing of the stored miniguns on the side of the ship. Using lead belcher, I began to pick out the various metallic bits on the rear half of the ship. Items such as vents, the grill-like things on the flat panels, hatches, and handrails would all get this treatment. The trim around the engine panels also got a nice coat of paint to help them pop a bit more. I start by painting the minigun's base and the main barrel with a brush before giving it a quick dry brush with lead belcher. This will help me get a solid tone on the biggest areas of the gun while keeping plenty of recessed shadows to help create that stowed effect. Finally, the rear end engine radiator heat sink thing will get a solid coat of paint before all metallics were given a Nuln Oil wash off. Using some Mephiston red, the various red details would be painted, starting by carefully painting a straight line down each of the landing gear engine panels, taking care to get straight lines and not overspray. The various little doohickeys and recesses around the ship would also get a small red dot. This gas panel would also get a coat of red now, however for the remaining 3 gas panels they will all be painted red in a later step. This was more of an oversight of planning on my end than actual process. Finally, I carefully drew a red line across one of the panels to help add more visual interest to the area. Some administratum gray was then used to pick out the light gray areas, starting with the landing gear engine panels, before moving on to the gas panels. And finally, the gas panels that had yet to be painted red got their coat of red paint. Using some Corax white, I'd begin by picking out all the smaller text on the gas panels. With the small text done, it was on to the bigger text. Finally, picking out the established text at the bottom of the logo. I will then re-go over some areas using that Mephiston red from earlier, just to ensure that any overspill is no longer shown. For the front sections, I went with a different method of painting. After priming everything with that Abaddon black, I then went in and painted all the dark gray areas with my airbrush, using some Mechanicus standard gray. I'll do the same thing for the lighter gray sections using some Administratum gray. With the grays done, I began to paint all the black areas of the front of the ship using some Abaddon black. This would be done across the entire model, taking care not to go over those nice smooth gray areas painted in the last step. Once done, I'd use the various gray tones that were used in the previous step and clean up any overspill. Using some Mephiston red, I picked up all the red details on the front of the ship. Using some lead belcher, I then painted all the metallic details, starting with the gribblies and handrails. I then painted the antennas using the same tone, taking care not to overspill onto the black. Finally, the underside hatches, vents, and details all got their coat. Using some Nuln oil, I carefully applied some to the grey panels I wanted to get a weathered effect. The wash will mainly pool in the recesses but leave the flat areas clear. However, using enough of it and carefully coaxing it around with your brush, it's possible to get the result you desire, where it pools exactly where you want. The engine, landing gear, and engine nozzle would all get a coat of lead belcher before getting washed with Nuln oil. The engine nozzle was printed out of clear resin. As a result, I stuffed some foam in the end so I didn't cover it up with paint, so that once it was done, it would allow some light to shine through. Finally, after receiving a wash of Nuln oil, the engines, support struts for the turrets themselves, and the various other metallic bits such as the landing gear all received a dry brush of lead belcher. Each of the landing gear's tips were then tickled with some AK Interactive Rust pigment that looks kinda like Martian soil, making it look like it's picked up some dirt on its travels throughout the Expanse. Finally, I glued everything to its base and figured out where best to put the little battery packs. It took some time, but eventually I was able to get a really good fit. And there we have it, the Rocinante in all her painted and lit up glory. This project was an absolute blast, and I'm really pleased with the results. I hope you all enjoyed this journey as much as I did. With that said, I am off to start my next project, which should hopefully result in a much shorter video. If you stuck with it to the end, I want to give you a big thanks, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hobby content.